So this is a quick heads up before the video gets really started. The reason that I'm showing you the outside of this house is because in this video I'm going to show you how to make a door sill and how to replace a door sill. And the first one, which I'm going to make, is going to have to straddle two rooms with an adjoining door that are of different levels. Now can you just see the faint outline of an old front door? So this cottage that I live in, I'm showing you which would have been a sort of a wall separating the two cottages, and those would have been the two arches to the two fronts of the two front doors. And so inside, this is the challenge I face. To see the difference in height between the two rooms, and this is effectively what I'm trying to accommodate. So we're looking at a good, I don't know, inch and a half, maybe 35 mil difference between those two rooms. So I've bought myself a piece of oak timber off the internet, and this is what I'm going to use in order to make a doorstep between the two rooms. So the first thing that I do is remove all of the trim that surrounds the door, so that I'm dealing with more simplistic shapes, because this is quite daunting. And once I've done that, I'm then going to mark out, as you can see here, all the shapes that I can get my hands on, and then I've decided that that's going to be my top. And as always, you're going to measure several times so that you can just make that one cut, because I can't afford to make a mistake on this bit of wood. I think I paid about £45 for this piece of wood, and yeah, measure as many times as you think you need to, so you only have to make that one cut. And I actually ended up marking it on both sides, which you'll see later on. So that's the table saw, and that's going to be my preferred method of taking away the bulk of the material. And here I am, and I'm just about to readjust the blade so that I can nibble out what I guess would be the door frame. So obviously this gets done to both sides of this plank, and then I think you can understand why I'm going to have it marked out on both sides. Over to the bandsaw. My bandsaw is not very good, and the blade tends to wander. I've done everything I can to adjust it, but it's just not a very good machine. And also it does have its limitations, and because of the chassis on the left hand side, the supporting chassis, it means you can only really cut from the right hand side. So I'm forced here to flip this upside down, and that really pays off, marking on both sides. Now that shows where I've got to cut all that material out, because that's going to accommodate the high side of the room. So I'm going to make two cuts. That's the first cut, and I'm going to raise the blade to the full height so that I can try and cut out the remaining piece of material in one go. And ironically, that's probably worth about £10, but it won't get wasted, because that'll be used when I put the second doorstep together, which you'll see shortly. So even using the full height of the blade, I'm still not where I need to be, so I'm just going to attack it from the other side of the cut and sneak up on it, because obviously I don't want to make a mistake at this point. And then once we whiz that through, you can see that that's completely removed, and I've got what appears to be quite a complex shape, and it's quite intimidating, but as you can see, it fits well. Now I need to cut this bit off and on the other side, and the reason being is that it doesn't stick out enough to actually look realistic, and also I'm going to have to remake the door trim on either side, and at the same time I'm going to put a round over on the nose of this. I would have preferred to have tilted the step with a little step forward, but I can't do that because there isn't enough material. So 120 and 240 I think was used, and then it was finally finished off with hand sanding before waxing. But this is in preparations for sort of the final fit, and I'm pretty confident at this stage that it's going to work. And there you see the front step and the back step, and then when it's fitted it should look like the whole thing is one solid block. And it does. So when it goes, this will be attached using construction adhesive. There'll be no fixings, physical fixings in this. And then down the back of it, I'll put a fresh piece of gripper rod so that the carpet joins to it seamlessly. So there'll be no There'll be no metallic strips holding the carpet together. I'm using Abranet, which is a product by the Microsystem, and I think it was 320 grit. I mean, it's incredible. It's the best sanding system I've ever used. Now I'm using a product called Microcilia Wax, and that is going to give me a really durable finish, and it doesn't matter if it gets scuffed or kicked. It'll just add to the character, as opposed to trying to varnish it or paint it. So that's good. So you can see that nice big gap at the back, and yeah, looks good. I'm pleased with that. So we can see it fits really nice now, and I'm pretty chuffed with that. And so now I'm just putting up the old bits of trim that I had to give myself an idea of what it's going to look like, and this is what it looks like completely finished. And with the gripper rod at the back holding the carpet down, it's a nice neat fit. And that reassuring click as the door closes. There you can see I've made the trim on the left hand side, I've remade it, and I've left it featureless to keep it level with the skirting board. And that's before, and that's after. There's a little bit of a gap on the floor to the left, but that's actually the floor dipping down. I'm not worried because ultimately with gripper rod and carpet, it's never going to be seen. Okay, so over to the next one. This is what I'm going to remake, and imagine that being the carpet. You'd have such a clear, visible, exposed areas of cement and rotted wood. It would look terrible. So I decided to replace this. So I removed it all, cut out all the rot, and then took that piece of timber that we had cut out from the last piece of wood, and you can see that I've now I've now screwed that in front of it, and that's that copper strip there is actually a lightning conductor, and the arrow is just pointing out that piece of offcut that we saved from the last job. And now I'm going to put down this stuff called Ka tanking solution, and it's primarily used really in areas where you've got no physical damp membrane, and so you'd put this down on a floor or on a wall, and it would seriously inhibit moisture and damp coming through. And I'm going to build this stuff up, mindful of the fact that I don't want it to be proud of either the front or the back, and then I'll cover it in a couple of thick layers of DPC, that damp-proof coursing, and then that will help to stop any moisture that's coming up through the brickwork and give me a chance to get the timber on top of it, and it should make a nice solid base for the next stage. Now I'm going to cover this with Titebond 3, which is the waterproof adhesive, a real generous application. And now I'm going to slide this in position. I've cut this beforehand, and there's nothing to show you other than the fact I've cut it to length and I've notched it out and put a round over on it. Tragically, I wasn't able to cut it so that I could do this in one go, so I had to make this little noggin of wood to fit in. But I used it as an opportunity to make it almost like a wedge, I suppose, and so it sort of it keeps everything a little bit stiffer. Now, with my weight on top of it and a bit of glue squeezing out, which is always reassuring, I can afford to nail it down, clean up any glue spillage. Now around the other side of the door frame, because there's no physical connection now between the door step and the actual side of the door frame, I've put a piece of timber in there and saturated it with glue so that when that dries, that should give it something to bite onto. Now I'm going over it with 120 grit to remove just a very small lip between that bottom piece of timber and the plank that sits on top of it. It's not much. Then an old trick that I've showed in many other videos that I've done, where you put little bits of glue in the nail holes and then sand straight over the top of it, and they absolutely disappear. So once that's done, I then I'm going to use a chisel in the corners where I can't get access to with the sander, and I'm just going to chisel away so it's completely flat, and that's a really sharp chisel, so I'm paring away basically is what I'm doing. And off camera I've also added some plaster into that corner as well. You can see it's a bit rough. So now doing the same thing on the opposing side, just trying to get rid of that arc, which you can see, which is created by the orbital sander. nice and smooth. Just using some more Abranet on a piece of timber just to smooth into the very corners. And once that's done, I will then finish with hand sanding at 320 just to make sure this is absolutely silken to touch before putting an application of stain on it. I also found as a top tip that if, like me, you've got you've got to do some filling on the walls and it's not a flat surface, the best thing to rub it down with, I've found now, is a Scotch-Brite pad, which is what you were seeing me use there. Now I'm just putting a little bit of wax on there, and the reason for the tape on the floor is that I'm going to have to glue and nail the gripper rod to the floor, and I figure that if there's wax on it, it's not going to be helpful to the glue, and so that's my reasoning behind that. Now I'm just touching up that little bit of wall that I've filled in off camera, and doing the same thing on the back, and you can see me using that Scotch-Brite pad. Yeah, it really works well. So time to just cut in. I'm using a little painter's fitch there, and that was removed when I was taking off the door trim. That came off as well, and it was a bit messy, so I decided to repair it as it went back on again. Off with the tape, and we are pretty much done now. All I've got to do is to hang the door, and you can't really see there, but just what I'm sitting the door on is a block of wood, and then underneath it is like a little bladder that I can pump up with my foot, which raises the door up to the perfect height so that I can match the hinges to the hinge holes. So it's like having another pair of hands, like a little helper. And then once I've got the door back on again, I can close it and put the rest of the trim up. And I made that door. That was actually that was the first set of videos that I ever made. And you can see I've been advertising myself throughout this. So I really hope that you'll support me and consider subscribing. It would make a massive difference to this channel. I think about 1 or 2% of views actually end up subscribing. So I'd really appreciate it if you consider subscribing. That's what we would have been looking at before, and that's what we're looking at now. So you can imagine that with carpet, what a clean transition there's going to be. So there are the 2 doors that we did, the two door steps that we've made. Listen, I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. I know it's a bit obscure, but there's lots of other stuff that I do that's less obscure. Thanks very much for watching.